If you want to make a lot of money playing poker, there's only one way to do it. You have to move up in stakes. In this video, I'm going to share my 3 biggest tips for a beginning poker player, probably somebody starting out at low or micro stakes, who wants to move up in stakes, make more money playing poker, and potentially turn this into their profession. By the way, if you're new here and you're wondering if I'm qualified to talk about this, I've coached hundreds of students. I was the head coach at Poker Detox, Coaching for Profits cash game stable for several years. From 2019 to 2022, I led that team to over $5 million in profits. Pretty much all of those students started at low stakes. I also, in 2019, moved up from 200 NL to 2K NL on Bovada within a period of about 6 or 7 months. I documented that on my Run at Once blog. So I know a thing or two about moving up in stakes. My first and most important tip is to focus on recreational players and game selection. If you want to understand why this is such an important concept, all you have to do is look at the world of chess. In chess, there are very, very few people who are actually making a decent living playing chess competitively. Poker isn't like that. There are many people who make a living playing poker, and the only reason that they can do that is because other people play poker for entertainment. And it's those recreational players that really prop up the whole ecosystem and make it a viable profession for so many professional poker players. I know this seems like a really obvious concept, like, yeah, of course I'm gonna focus on the recreational players. It seems that way, but it's actually not, because when you actually go to play poker, most of the hands you're gonna play are gonna be against other professional poker players, at least in most pools. And additionally, those players are gonna be the toughest challenge to play against. And so it makes it really easy for you to get distracted from the recreational player at your table and instead focus on sort of this illusion that all of the professionals are competing against one another and you know that you have to beat the other professionals in order to make money, when actually that's not true at all. According to my online database, the average recreational player usually loses at around 30 big blinds per 100. That means that if a recreational player buys in for a half stack for 50 big blinds, on average, within about 150 hands, they will lose their entire stack. On the other hand, this varies a bit from site to site, but in a healthy ecosystem where the rake is not too high, the average regular tends to win at about 1 to 4 big blinds per 100. So if you want to make money, who should you focus on? The person who is donating 30 big blinds per 100, or the person who is actually winning at several big blinds per 100? Obviously, you want to focus on the recreational. Pick the low-hanging fruit. Recreationals make a lot of fundamental mistakes when they're playing poker, so really any reasonable strategy you play against them will make a lot of money. But that doesn't mean that you should just stop right there, because by exploiting those players, there's far more edge to be gained. And I would argue by studying recreationals, you can gain a lot more of an edge than by studying how to play against good players. There's not a lot of content about how to exploit recreational poker players on the internet. Part of that is because it's not a very well understood concept. In fact, many people have exactly the wrong idea about how you're supposed to exploit recreational players. That might seem like it should be impossible, but like I said, any reasonable strategy does make a lot of money against recreational players. So it's not like if you have a bad strategy against them, you're going to completely lose your edge. It's just that you're not going to be gaining the maximum. Another reason there's not very much content on this subject is that the people that really do understand how to maximally exploit recreational players guard that information very closely. They don't want to just give that information away for free and turn every professional poker player into a max exploit bot against the recreationals, because that's the kind of thing that's going to massively reduce their bottom line and potentially even kill online poker. This goes for me as well. I don't really ever divulge this information except for within my coaching programs. But just because there isn't a lot of good information out there about how to max exploit recreationals, it doesn't mean you shouldn't think about it. You should always be using common sense and logic to try to gain as much edge as possible against these players. Don't allow yourself to just autopilot and play the same strategy you would play against professionals, because that doesn't make any sense. I'm gonna add one caveat to this, and there's gonna be a caveat to every tip in this video. So this is gonna be sort of like 3 do's and 3 don'ts to moving up in stakes. The caveat here is that being a savvy game selector does not mean being a bum hunter. You wanna focus on how you can win the most money from a recreational player when they're at your table, and you want to put yourself in games where you're likely to have a lot of recreational players. But in my opinion, that's sort of where you should stop. I think where game selection turns into bum hunting is when you will sort of obsessively table select and actually be afraid to play against another professional player. I think you should just do your research about which pools are good to play in at what times, set up a schedule, and then make sure you've got a good strategy against recreational players when you do run into them. But don't just automatically sit out as soon as a recreational player at your table sits out. I think that really kills the games and makes it a poorer experience for everybody. So in summary, while I don't think that focusing on recreational players is going to be the end-all be-all strategy in poker, eventually you are going to have to learn more theory and how to play against the stronger players as well. That's just inevitable. But it is the most important thing for while you are moving up in the stakes, and it should be prioritized. My second tip for moving up in stakes is to use an aggressive bankroll management strategy and to take a lot of small shots. For this, I'm going to briefly show you some calculations in Prime Dope Variance Calculator. This is a website that I've featured quite often in my videos. And we're not going to do very much math, but I just want to show you basically that if you were to ask a computer what is the optimal way for me to manage my bankroll when I'm moving up in stakes, it would tell you that you should be sort of like insanely aggressive with your bankroll. So I think what I'm actually going to do here is go to my blog, and I'm going to go to an article that I wrote called "You Should Probably Stop Playing Zoom." And this is going to have a graph in it which kind of shows everything that I need to show here. This graph was made using Prime Dope Variance Calculator, and I will link the calculator in this description below. But basically what this graph is saying is it's your bankroll requirements versus your win rate. The y-axis is giving a bankroll in big blinds, so 5,000 big blinds would be 50 buy-ins. And the x-axis is your win rate in big blinds per 100. So this graph is saying if you have a win rate of 3 big blinds per 100, you need a bankroll of about 50 buy-ins to ensure that you have less than 5% risk of ruin, less than 5% risk of busting your bankroll on a downswing. And you can see that as win rate increases, your risk of ruin goes down exponentially. And this is going back to my first point, another reason why you really want to focus on game selection, especially while you're moving up in stakes, because if you have a high win rate in your games, you don't really need very much of a bankroll to play in the games, and then you can just move up in stakes very quickly without requiring too much liquidity. So these calculations are saying if you have a win rate of 3 big blinds per 100, you want 50 buy-ins. If you have a win rate of 6 big blinds per 100, you only need about 25 buy-ins for less than 5% risk of ruin. So we've got 50 buy-ins, 25 buy-ins, and if you're really crushing your games at like 15 big blinds per 100, you only need a 10 buy-in bankroll for less than 5% risk of ruin. That's pretty crazy. And what's even crazier is that these calculations are done assuming that you can never move down. So in reality, what you would actually probably do is have a bankroll of like maybe 20 buy-ins and take a 5 buy-in shot every time you get over 20 buy-ins. And if you lose that shot and you just move back down, you make that money back, and then you take another 5 buy-in shot. If you can move down every time you go on a downswing, well, every time you move down, you double your bankroll effectively. And so your actual risk of ruin is going to be much, much lower than even this graph, which is quite aggressive, is saying. So this is sort of the mathematical reasoning behind my suggestion, which a lot of people think is a little bit too aggressive, but I think it's really fine. I would suggest when you're starting out in poker at lower micro stakes, have a separate bankroll from your living expenses. Ideally, if you're not playing poker professionally yet and you're not established, you should have a separate source of income. Keep a separate bankroll for poker. Keep 20 buy-ins, maybe 30, and take small shots. And then as you move up in stakes, you can start to build a bigger bankroll, maybe move up to 40 or 50 buy-ins. And that'll mostly just be for mindset reasons, just because as games get bigger, as the numbers get bigger, most people like to have a larger bankroll for security. My caveat for this strategy is that you want to also manage your downswings. So if you're playing a really aggressive bankroll management strategy, it's possible you can move up several limits without ever incurring like a really huge downswing. So imagine, you're a 25 and out player and you've never gone on more than like a $500 downswing in your life. And then you go on a heater and you move up in stakes rapidly. You jump to 50 NL and then 100 NL. And let's say you stick the landing at 100 NL. And now you've got a big bankroll at 100 NL. And then you go on a 15 buy-in downswing at 100 NL before you have to, according to your bankroll rules, move down back to 50 NL. I would say if you have only lost $500 at most previously, you should try to move down. Even if you don't have to, you should not allow yourself to lose more than about 150% of what you've lost previously. Not everybody needs to do this for mindset reasons, but I think most people get pretty discouraged when they go on a downswing, which is much larger than their previous maximum downswing. So I always suggest just think about how much you're comfortable with losing at any given time. And sometimes you can just preemptively move down and make some money back at lower stakes before you cross that threshold, even if it's sort of a little bit too conservative for your bankroll management strategy to do so. It's fine to do it. So in summary, use an aggressive bankroll management strategy, but also don't be afraid to set sort of conservative stop losses, because there's no harm in just going back down one limit lower and making some money back before you try to take another shot again. I always say that for people who have bad bankroll management strategy, it's not because they take shots too aggressively. Bad bankroll management strategy just means that you fail to move down when it's time to. In reality, most of the people who have made a lot of money playing poker have been very aggressive with their bankrolls. They were just also able to put their ego aside and move down when they ran bad in order to recover. My third and final tip is to find a tribe. Don't just try a lone wolf strategy. For most people, the lone wolf approach is not going to work, especially now that online poker is harder to beat than it used to be. If you can find a tribe where people are moving up and making more money and improving very rapidly in poker, then if you're spending a lot of time around people like that, you are also likely going to do the same thing. In addition, you're going to save yourself from falling into various pitfalls. I'll give you an example. Recently, there were a couple of sites, both GG Poker and Bet Online, which massively increased the rake on their cash games. And it would have been nice if they had told people that they were going to do this, but instead they just kind of launched an update stealthily in the night without telling anybody, and increased the rake by like 50 to 100% in both cases. Now, if you're just a lone wolf and you're not really paying very close attention, it could be months before you realize that the rake increased that much in your games. Like if you just didn't check that stat, you might think, well, I'm just kind of having a bad couple of months, and maybe you don't check your poker tracker and see that they're raking another 3 big blinds per 100 or 2 big blinds per 100 off the top of your profits. If you're in a tribe, you will constantly be exposed to information like this that's going to help you a lot. Like, hey, this site just increased their rake a ton, probably should get off of that site. Or, hey, have you heard about this site? Games seem really, really good. Maybe you should get on there and give it a try. Have you heard about this poker software that just came out? It's really helped my game a lot. These are the types of tips you're going to get when you have a strong network, and there's many more examples that I could give. So finding your tribe can be really helpful, but my final caveat is to not get lost in your tribe. Don't get distracted from the big picture. You don't want to spend all of your time socializing with other people in your poker server. As much as making friends with other poker players is great, you have to remember that this is also your job. And if you're just focusing on that and not on getting better at poker, that can be an issue for your development as a player. In addition, you also don't want to get really wrapped up in micro strategy discussions. If you feel like you're in a hand history discussion group and players tend to spend like 30 minutes talking about a single hand, maybe you jump into the group, you discuss a couple hands, and then all of a sudden there's one hand that people have a disagreement about, and you end up talking about that for 40 minutes. That's a sign that your study group is not really being very productive, and it's just getting distracted in the minutia of poker. Again, that's a really good way to waste a lot of time and stunt your development as a player. You should always be coming back to understanding where your money is coming from in poker and not getting wrapped up in minor details and micro strategy discussions. All right, that's all I've got for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you learned something. Please consider liking and subscribing to my channel for more content like this, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Good luck at the tables.